This episode of The Human Bible is brought to you by Harry's Shaving Kits. Please visit harrys.com and use promo code HUMAN for $5 off your first purchase.
The Bible, love it or hate it, is a book filled with puzzles and mysteries. It will be our task to unravel as many of them as possible. We want to understand the Bible as a human book, not a book inspired by a god. I'm Robert M. Price, and this is The Human Bible. This is The Human Bible, and I am your host, Robert M. Price. The Human Bible is a radio show and podcast of the Center for Inquiry, a think tank advancing science, reason, freedom of inquiry, and humanist values in public affairs and at the grassroots. I guess that's where we are. Okay, let's get up to speed. As we always do, to kind of basically try to help me not take for granted that you're already familiar with esoterica that I picked up over several decades of studying the Bible like a nerd. And so let's share the wealth. Okay, thought it might be fun to deal with different ways of interpreting the book of Revelation. Oh, what fun it is. Now, why are there different ways of interpreting the book of Revelation? Well, two big reasons. One of them is that the whole thing's written in cipher language, right? It is so chock full of symbolism that inevitably there's going to be all kinds of ways to interpret it. Secondly, it looks like, and one of the clearest statements made about 3 times in the book, that it predicts that Christ is going to come back and the world's going to end real quick from the standpoint of the writer and the original readers. You looked at the calendar lately? Didn't happen. So if you're not going to kick the book of Revelation out of the Bible as a false prophecy, you better come up with something else that might mean. In fact, it was about the year 600 CE that all the churches finally agreed on letting the book of Revelation into the Bible. The Eastern churches tended to think it was weird science fiction and didn't want it in there, but eventually they yielded. This had something to do with it, I think. So what are the basic approaches to it? Well, there is Well, let's start with the historicist view. This is the view popular among the Protestant reformers and held by a lot of people still today, that says the book of Revelation is a symbolic forecast of the whole of church history. Now, most people that hold this don't think there's going to be much church history or any history in their near future. They usually think they're living pretty much at the end, and so they interpret all the symbolism as dealing with major events in history from the first century to their own day. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody interpret it up to their own day and say, well, chapter so and so, well, that's us, but the rest of it, who the heck knows? That waits for the future readers to make the connections. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. They all assume, yeah, we're living at the end of this. Martin Luther sure thought so. Right? He's saying that who's the false prophet? Gotta be Muhammad. Who's the Antichrist? Gotta be the Pope, or at least the papacy, so that you had a whole succession of antichrists. Well, he thought the world wasn't going to keep going. There wasn't much room for more interpretation because he was hurrying to finish his translation of the Bible into German because he didn't want to be stuck with it half finished when the apocalyptic trumpet blasted. Seriously. So they usually think that they're in the end times anyway, but what about all the stuff leading up to it? it's trying to predict the whole of history. Now, there's a kind of shrewdness about this because there are people, to just jump the gun a little bit, who think that the book of Revelation is all about the end times in which they live, in which case you got a lot of explaining to do. Why the huge gap between the first century and ours, right? So at least the historicist view is trying to say, oh, no, it took in the whole period, albeit kind of, lightly. It just hit major, very major topics and left most of it out. But they would say, I think it's good enough, the examples that Muhammad, who was certainly, he'd lived hundreds of years before Martin Luther, he's in there, he's predicted, the rise of Islam is predicted, and the Catholic Church, that's the harlot Babylon and all that. Of course, that started long before him and so forth. So he figured, it kind of spottily covers the whole time. You can find this in some commentaries. I happen to remember reading this in Haley or Halley's, I don't know how you say it, a Bible handbook. I just found that book a treasure trove of information about the Bible when I was in, I guess, junior high or high school. Now I would say it's largely misinformation, but I still got the book on the shelf. It's a lot of fun, and that has the historicist view, a good summary of it, and I'm sure it's elsewhere too in plenty of books. So that's the historicist one. Then there is the oh man, I don't even know what this is called anymore. I've forgotten, but the view held by premillennialists, dispensationalists, your sectarian Protestant movements like the Baptists, the Plymouth Brethren, Pentecostals, and others. They think that there is a bit of historicism, so-called, in it, because there are these 7 letters that preface the apocalyptic content of the rest of the book. These brief epistles, you might say, they're not really long enough to be called that, but John of Patmos, whoever he is, has this vision, which is very much like the visions in the book of Daniel. In fact, it's pretty obvious that was his literary inspiration. He has this vision of the angel of Jesus, who Jesus has sent to inform him of what must come to pass, and he is to pass it on to these churches under his supervision, these 7 churches in Asia Minor, Sardis, Thyatira, Pergamum, Laodicea, Philadelphia, Smyrna, and so forth. And not for everybody necessarily, but for the churches that he's some kind of bishop over. It doesn't exactly say. And in each one of these, there's a personalized message encouraging them if they're in a position of persecution, or rebuking them because of their spiritual complacency. And generally, each one of these little letters will get around to using some of the imagery that will be writ large later in the book. And it says, now you got big things ahead of you, and so it's time to really buckle down and purify yourselves and return to your original zeal, because you're going to need it when all this starts coming down. So each one. Well, what many interpreters do with this is to say each of the letters is really describing not so much, or at least not only, some local church in the writer's day, but is describing in broad outline the way the church, the whole bunch of Christians worldwide, will be in 7 successive periods of church history leading up to the end. So they kind of take the historicist view of Luther and the reformers and so on, and compact it into the first 3 chapters. And then from there on in, they say that the events predicted for the Great Tribulation, and they throw in the rapture and the Battle of Armageddon, all the things to happen in the last 7 years of the world they're on display in admittedly symbolic terms. throughout the rest of the book. And this is where Hal Lindsey and the whole Bible prophecy movement comes in, because they try to crack the code. And of course, you're supposed to. It is, as I say, heavily symbolic. So that's not their error, I think. But they're right in the path of the steamroller of those passages. It says, "Behold, I am coming soon. These are the things which must shortly come to pass." It didn't happen. And so what they have to resort to is to say, well, God kind of is just working from the end of the last of the 7 church ages. And of course, we're there now, and we can see all of these things happening that technically would have been irrelevant to all Christian readers throughout all of these centuries that have intervened between John of Patmos and Hal Lindsey. So all the rest of the book has to do with things about to happen in our day. Well, the third major way of understanding the book of Revelation is called preterism, which means it's past. And this is an approach that has segued into a very interesting understanding of Christian eschatology. That is, the belief not just in what Revelation says may happen, but in what Christians ought to expect to happen, not necessarily the same thing. Let me try to explain this. You can find in many commentaries, especially the great commentary in the International Critical Commentary series, the one by R.H. Charles, the approach that the book of Revelation did just mean to send the 7 letters with copies of the book to those 7 churches. And of course, you can always draw lessons from them, but they're not really predictive prophecies of anything. But then once it does get into predictive prophecies, as of chapter 4, these were supposed to be predictions, and they are in code. But they are things that are supposed to happen in the reader's day. Otherwise, what is the point? Right? Why tell, that's interesting, hundreds or thousands of years from now, so-and-so may happen. Yeah, so what, right? Like in the Woody Allen movie, when young Alvy is in the, I guess, what is it, the psychiatrist's office with his mom, and he won't do his homework. He says, well, we learned about the expansion of the universe. One day it's just going to expand all it can, and it'll pop like a balloon, and that'll be the end of everything. And he says, so what business is that of yours? Do your homework. Like, really? I mean, how much sleep do you lose over the certain knowledge that the sun will go nova one day and turn the earth into a cinder, right? Does that really matter to you a lot? If you think about it, you say, it's a shame, but are you going to see it? Who cares, right? So R.H. Charles and others say, yes, it had to do with things expected in their own day. And he made an amazing case, he and others, showing that the symbols of the book of Revelation are not that far out. It's not that tough to figure out what's going on. In fact, if you remember Don McLean's song, American Pie, you can go through all the metaphors in those lyrics, and people have done this, and say, well, he's really talking about the Rolling Stones here, and this is a reference to Elvis and to Bob Dylan and this and that and the other thing. Yeah, that's right. Well, in the same way, you can be pretty sure, based on ancient imagery and so forth, what he's talking about. The mark of the beast, which comes out to 666. That sure enough, that's an ancient reckoning method whereby you take the letters of a person's name and pretend that they're numbers, like A equals 1, B equals 2, that kind of thing. It works out to Neron Caesar, Nero Caesar. There's some manuscripts that have 616 as the mark of the beast. Well, what do you know? That's the same name, but without the superfluous N on the end of Neron. So Nero Caesar is 616. It's pretty obvious that's what they're getting at. But then it says that the beast has 7 heads, and one of them is mortally wounded, but it recovers, and that head is one of the 7 kings, but yet the 10th, etc., etc. It turns out this seems to be a reference, as Irenaeus already knew in the 2nd century, to the popular belief that Nero either hadn't been skagged, is the word, by his palace guard and escaped, or he was killed but would rise from the dead, and in either case he would go to the east across the Euphrates to the Parthian Empire, the great enemy of Rome, and to take revenge on Rome for turning him out. He would lead the Parthian cavalry to Rome, the city on the 7 hills, and conquer it. Irenaeus certainly was right. That's what's going on. And they thought, you see, this makes sense only in terms of the ancient Roman Empire. I know Hal Lindsey says, well, the common market will be a revived Roman Empire, because there has to be a Roman Empire in place for Jesus to destroy when he gets here. So if he didn't destroy the first one, there's got to be a second one. Well, is there going to be another Parthian Empire too? Oh. At any rate, the Parthian cavalry, that's who he's talking about, with all these locusts from the bottomless pit that have hair like women's hair. That's the horsehair crests of the Parthian helmets. They have breastplates of metal. Well, yeah, they did. And so on and so on. All the little hints are given you to figure it out. And the author thought you couldn't figure it out, right? This calls for wisdom on the part of the saints, or let him who has wisdom count the number of the beast, for it is a number of a man. That was typical in ancient apocalypses. It was like, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. You didn't want to just blab it and cast your pearls before swine. You wanted to make sure that only the people that were wise enough would get it. And so it's not impossible to decode it, and I think Charles and these other guys have done it pretty well. Plus, it's filled with ancient astrology, and a lot of the imagery comes from there, as Bruce J. Molina has shown in a more recent book called, I think it's the message and genre of the Book of Revelation, something like that. It's Malina, if you want to look them up on Amazon, a great book. And all of this stuff was expected to happen very quickly in the imminent future. So that's preterism. From our standpoint, it's already past. Now that, as I say, has turned into a view of the second coming and what Christians are to expect. What's the deal there? I think the pioneer work was by a man named Russell, I forget, it was D.H. Russell, called The Parousia. Parousia, which means the coming, the presence, the arrival of Christ, the second coming. He and the preterists descended from him today say that, all of this stuff was supposed to happen, and one of the big items that happens in Revelation is the siege and destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. You have some of that in chapter 11. He says that's really the expectation of the coming of Christ in judgment. What was ended was the history of Old Testament worship and the destruction of the temple. Judaism is over, but in a sense, so is Christianity, because the rapture, the taking up of the saints, of which there couldn't have been too many at the time, that happened invisibly at the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, he says that explains the crummy character of the Christians of the 2nd century onward. They're sunk in papist superstition and all this kind of stuff, because the cream of the crop was gone, taken to heaven. That is an astonishing view. In order to get the book of Revelation off the hook, and to say all the apocalyptic technicolor was really just symbolism for the end of an era, though it does seem to have involved a rapture of the saints at the time. You're willing to say the second coming of Christ is long over with. I would love to know what preterists, and you think I would know, I mean, there's a lot of them these days, somebody's got to tell me what they think is yet to happen. Are they stuck here? Is the future open and not scripted by prophecies as dispensationalists think it is? I'd love to know, but so there are these are the three major ways of understanding Revelation. It's not that they're the only ones. In fact, another way, I guess I should toss this in, that seems a bit sort of a different kind of an interpretation is to say, yeah, this isn't really describing specifics in advance. It's just setting up symbolic scenarios, some of spiritual complacency and its dangers, some of the dangers of martyrdom and totalitarianism, some depicting an overweening government that demands you cooperate or you're not getting fed. These things happen repeatedly through history. Like if for instance, you eventually have to take an electronic chip into your body so the government can track you and get all your information. I'm not saying it will, who the heck knows, but suppose that happened. Would that be the fulfillment of a prediction in the Bible? Or is it just the kind of thing that once people announced it, you would immediately think of the Bible and say, son of a gun, it's just like in the Bible. I ought to be alarmed at this. Well, that's not a bad way of looking at it, actually. It's not literally a prediction, but it's a succession of scenarios that ought to make you think, as it says in the Gospels, to help you discern the signs of the times, right? So very interesting, and there are other ways, but these are, I think, the three major ones, and another interesting one. Yeah, so approaches to the apocalypse. Now we're up to speed. Not that the end of the world has been so speedy in coming, and personally, I don't mind it lingering for a long time. I don't want to have to buy that sunblock for the nova occurring, right?
Hi, everybody. This is Paul at the Center for Inquiry, and I just need to interrupt Bob for one moment to let you know about today's sponsor, Harry's. Now, who is Harry's? They do shaving the way it ought to be done. Harry's is a subscription service focused on providing guys a great shaving experience for a fraction of the price of the other companies. Now, I've gotten my own shipment from Harry's, and the first thing you see is how classy it is. It's got this clean product design. It's part of their whole less but better aesthetic. It's like opening a box from the Apple Store. It's really nice. So you get these high-quality blades engineered in their own factory in Germany for sharpness and strength, and I can tell you, they're really comfortable, and they last way longer than any of the others that I've used, and they're about half the price of some of the big competitors. So Harry's replaces the hassle of getting your expensive shaving needs from the store with the convenience and ease of ordering online, shipped right to your door. Harry's was co-founded by one of the guys who co-founded Warby Parker, the super convenient online eyewear company, so you know that they know how to do this right. So you need to check this out. Go to harrys.com, use the promo code HUMAN to save $5 on your first purchase. So $15 gets you a set that includes a handle, 3 blades, shaving cream, shipped right to your door, and Harry's even offers a custom engraving option to engrave your initials right on the razor. So go see what it's all about. Go to harrys.com and use the offer code HUMAN. And now back to Bob.
Yeah, well, you know that apologetics is never being willing to say you're sorry. I got a good one today. It's fairly easily dealt with. I don't know why I didn't think of this one before. I've just been revising my translation of the Gospel of Mark, and that's partly why this is on my mind, I guess. You know how Peter comes across kind of like an idiot in the Gospel of Mark? The other Gospels sort of clean him up a bit. He's still kind of a straight man and a fall guy, but he really takes it on the chin in Mark's Gospel. He misunderstands everything. He denies Jesus. He's never even rehabilitated afterward. Oh, brother. It's suggested that Peter must have told Mark all of these stories? Mark, whoever he was, that's the most common name in the Roman civilization. It could be anybody, even if it was a guy named Mark. We don't even know that, but, Peter must have gotten this right from the apostles' mouth, not from general Christian knowledge or historical memory. And why is that? And you see where this is going, right? That would mean that Mark is based on eyewitness reporting. He was in touch with Peter, who remembered all this stuff and said, oh, yeah, we did this, and then we did that, and so forth. Why is that now? Well, because who but Peter would have been willing to air this dirty laundry? Most people would, this is the old criterion of embarrassment thing again, right, that critics use in historical Jesus studies. Anybody else, admirers of Peter, wouldn't have wanted to depict him in these embarrassing situations with it. Gee, Lord, how many times do I have to forgive my brother if he sins against me? How about 7? That'd be pretty good. And he's waiting for the pat on the head. And Jesus says, 7? Listen, I got news for you. You got to forgive him 70 times 7, etc. Right? All kinds of stuff like this where Peter's instantly deflated, right? He always looks bad. Oh, if everybody else abandons you, I won't. I'll die right beside you if I have to. And then, cock-a-doodle-doo, Jesus, I've never heard of the guy, right? Well, who would transmit this stuff? I mean, they're not going to want to make good old Pete look bad. It must have been Peter, who by this time was very humble and was happy to share his weak moments as examples to show you that anybody can fall, anybody can slip up, and when you do, you've got to pick yourself up and reach out to Jesus again. That he's the only one who would have had a good-humored, humble outlook on it, and would have been happy to share his pitfalls and pratfalls as cautionary tales. He's the only one that wouldn't have been embarrassed. As with so many apologetics arguments, that's certainly not unreasonable. I mean, it does kind of fit human nature. But there's a naivete about this, as Alfred Loisy pointed out decades ago. Who would have told such stories to the disadvantage and disparagement of a major Christian leader like Peter? Well, obviously, should be obvious, somebody who didn't care much for Peter, or at least the faction that claimed Peter as its figurehead and founder, somebody that wanted to discredit Peter or Petrine Christianity in favor of Paul or whoever else, James the Just, Apollos, whatever. There were factional polemics in the New Testament, at least a lot of it makes sense that way. Why does Jesus repudiate his family when they come to take charge of him? Oh, you say my mother and brothers are here and want to take me away? Well, I'll tell you who my brothers and sister and mother are. These people, my disciples. Whoa, that's pretty rough. Who would have told that story? Well, somebody that didn't care for the so-called heirs of Jesus, those who claimed to be like the relatives of Muhammad in early Islam. Oh, we're the people that should run the community. Others said, no, it's the companions of the prophet, not you jerks. The same thing, you had rivalries among the leadership factions of the early church. And so who would tell the story of Peter denying Jesus? If there was a Peter and there was a Jesus, who knows if Peter denied Jesus? It may be just slander altogether, right? We don't know. But apparently somebody is trying to make Peter look bad and say to Christians who venerate him, you're barking up the wrong tree. This guy was an idiot. He and his buddies didn't understand a word Jesus said. You should really join us and follow Paul and his successors, because Jesus went out of his way to recruit this guy when it was obvious the 12 were a bunch of morons and he needed to find somebody who he could trust, etc. Right? So I'm afraid that one just doesn't work. Now, it's not like we know beyond doubt that Peter was not the source of the Gospel of Mark, right? It's not like we know beyond doubt that the stories that make Peter look bad are the product of anti-Petrine propaganda. We don't, but the point is the fact that the latter makes an awful lot of sense, and it's the same kind of thing we do see in religious factionalism even today, certainly means you cannot assume, as apologists like to, that because Peter might be the authority behind Mark, that we can be sure that he is, and therefore the Gospels are eyewitness accounts, and therefore it all really happened. Wait just a second. They're always jumping the gun. That's really the whole point of apologetics. So I'm afraid the criterion of embarrassment that says Peter was the source of the Gospel of Mark, nah, I'm afraid not. Well, how about a listener question? Bruce Harris Bentzman says, I've been enjoying your program immensely. I would appreciate it if you could comment on Genesis 9:13. That's the end of the flood story, right? To pledge that he's not going to flood the human race out like a bunch of rats again. God puts his bow in the sky, and he says, in the future, when it rains, the bow will appear as a kind of an alarm clock to remind me to stop the rain so there's no flood, right? Okay, Bruce says, my question is, if God had a bow, what was he hunting? If he placed his bow in the cloud to demonstrate his promise not to destroy mankind again, how would he continue to hunt? And why, after having made this promise, does God intend to renege on it with the apocalypse? There are many clues that the Old Testament God was just another Oriental despot, petty and vain, and decked out with the paraphernalia of ancient Mesopotamians. Respectfully submitted, Bruce Harris Bentzman. Actually, you got a good question. There were ancient hunters like Artemis or Diana, and in the Bible there was Nimrod, the great hunter before Yahweh. I know you didn't ask this, but I can't resist sharing what somebody told me on the Bible Geek. I expressed consternation that the name Nimrod has been made into a synonym for idiot in common parlance. I thought, what on earth does that have to do with the only character in literature named Nimrod, the great hunter, in the early chapters of Genesis? And somebody told me. They said it comes from a Bugs Bunny cartoon where Elmer Fudd is out there trying to kill the rabbit, and of course he fails, and after subjecting him to humiliating defeats, Bugs Bunny sort of rubs his hands together and says, poor little Nimrod. Well, Bugs knew what people today don't, that Nimrod was the mighty hunter, and so he's sarcastically comparing Elmer Fudd as a hunter to the mighty Nimrod, and so people don't get it, and that's where it came from, that he's a stupid little schmuck, so a Nimrod must be one. What a mistake. Anyway, sorry about that. Okay, there are mythological divine hunters, but Jehovah is not one of them. His bow that he put in the sky was a war bow. It was a weapon of war. Well, what did he fire from it? Tells us in Psalm 18:14 and other places. Yea, he sent out his arrows and scattered them, that is the enemy, and he shot out lightnings and discomfited them. Ah, yeah, okay. They believe that Yahweh was a warrior, as in the Song of the Sea in Exodus, after the business with Yul Brynner and his soldiers getting drowned. They start singing, Yahweh, Yahweh, a mighty man of war. Well, he was a storm god like his counterpart in Canaanite mythology, Baal, and storm gods tended to be war gods. Well, there was another Teutonic war god, but Thor, the storm god, was a mighty warrior, right? The hammer. Indra was the storm god and the war god, etc. Because when you have a big thunderstorm and they're clashing clouds, it kind of looks like warring hosts in the heavens. And the flashes of lightning, what is that? It's the lightning arrows, or hammer, or one thing or another, depending on your culture. And so they figured that Yahweh battled his foes, especially the dragons Leviathan and Rahab and so forth, using his bow and arrow, firing from his chariot, which was drawn by the cherubs, personified clouds. This stuff is sprinkled all through the Old Testament, even in the New Testament. They will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of Shaddai, power, and coming with the clouds, that is, in the cloud chariots of heaven. I think the writer of the book of Revelation knew that, because he at least has Jesus come with a great armed host at the end. So yeah, it was his war bow, and the point is, okay, I'm hanging up the gloves. I was at war with the human race when I unleashed the flood, but I promise I'll never fly off the handle and do it again. I see it didn't do any good anyway. He says, I'll never again flood the world, because the imagination of man's heart is only evil continually. Well, in other words, nothing's changed, but don't worry, I won't do this again. Did that mean he wasn't going to fight the enemies of Israel? Well, no, they figured he would. It's just a way of saying that you don't have to worry about me anymore. Now, doesn't the book of Revelation negate that? Yeah, it does, but of course, Jehovah didn't say at the end that he would never judge the world again. He's just not going to flood it out. I'm kind of guessing the storyteller wasn't envisioning any other kind of apocalyptic doom. But under the influence of other religions and their end-of-the-world scenarios, we eventually get in the Bible this kind of stuff. Like, I think is it First or Second Peter? I'm really losing it. Toward the end there, they say that I think it's Second Peter, one day the elements will be dissolved in fire. And given that prospect, what sort of people should you be as the end of the age comes? That's right out of Stoicism, the cosmic conflagration. So a lot of other things, tributaries enter the stream of the Bible later on, but I get the impression the Genesis writer there just wasn't thinking of any other possible mode of apocalyptic doom, and so he means the human race is not going to be destroyed again. And it's just that, in the same way that at the end of the Garden of Eden story, there's no hope for eternal life. Right? There's no prospect of that, but later on in the Bible there sure is, because different ideas are mixed in. So very good question. The war bow is hung up on the mantle, at least for the prospect of a flood, I guess. I've told this story before, I suppose. Stop me if you've heard this one, or fast forward or something. But in the church I used to pastor, they had the kids' choir come up there and sing a song about the rainbow and how it was created after the flood. And the song was called Rainbow Valentine, God's little Valentine to the human race. And I could not keep my mouth shut. I got up to preach after the kid choir, and I said, geez, I wonder if they should call that song Rainbow Epitaph, since they killed the whole human race. But you can see why I didn't remain pastor. Anyway, speaking of making an ass of yourself, it's time for Is That in the Bible? And basically what I'm asking is, you remember the old movies, Francis the Talking Mule? The precursor to, I guess, sort of the John the Baptist to Mr. Ed, who would come along on TV later, Wilbur. Yeah, Francis the Talking Mule is in the Bible. I'm thinking of Balaam's ass. Let me read you Numbers 22, let's see, verses about 21 through 34. It's a little long, but you'll enjoy it. So Balaam rose in the morning and saddled his ass, meaning his donkey, of course, and went with the princes of Moab. Now, what's going on here? Tiny bit of backstory. The king of Moab, Balak, wants Balaam to level a curse on Israel because he's afraid of them as an enemy. Balaam is a genuine prophet, though not an Israelite, and he is in touch with God, and it implies that if he did issue a curse, it would probably work, but God doesn't want him to do it. Right? So, okay, 22, but God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of Yahweh took his stand in the way as his adversary. Now he was riding on the ass, and his 2 servants were with him. And the ass saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the road, with a drawn sword in his hand. And the ass turned aside out of the road and went into the field. And Balaam struck the ass to turn her into the road. Then the angel of Yahweh stood in a narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on either side. And when the ass saw the angel of Yahweh, in fact, this is just like monster, demon stories, right, where the animals can sense the presence of Damien Thorne or something where humans can't, right? Same idea. Okay, when the ass saw the angel of Yahweh, she pushed against the wall and pressed Balaam's foot against the wall. So he struck her again. Then the angel of Yahweh went ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right or to the left. When the ass saw the angel of Yahweh, she lay down under Balaam. And Balaam's anger was kindled. This is great, right? The donkey can see the angel, but the prophet can't. It's just great. Balaam's anger was kindled, and he struck the ass with his staff. Then Yahweh opened the mouth of the ass, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" And Balaam said to the ass, "Because you've made sport of me." It's like he's talking to the donkey every day, right? Like the guy on Mr. Ed. "I wish I had a sword in my hand, for then I would kill you." And the ass said to Balaam, "Am I not your ass upon which you have ridden all your life long to this day? Was I ever accustomed to do so to you?" And he said, "Well, no." Then Yahweh opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, and he bowed his head and fell on his face. And the angel of Yahweh said to him, "Why have you struck your ass," your donkey, "these 3 times? Behold, I have come forth to withstand you, because your way is perverse before me. And the ass saw me and turned aside before me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely just now I would have slain you and let her live." Then Balaam said to the angel of Yahweh, "I have sinned, for I did not know that thou didst stand in the road against me." Yeah, that's in the Bible. Now, I mean, even if you were willing to imagine that God could allow the donkey to speak, and that the donkey could be allowed to have thoughts like this, right? I mean, that's 2 different things, right? I mean, maybe it just can't speak its mind, but it's thinking in a mighty human way. Now, I know most people seem to think, quote unquote, as donkeys do, but here we have a donkey who is assumed simply as a donkey to have more or less human intelligence, right? It just needs the opportunity to speak, and it gets it. You'd still have the problem of Balaam doesn't think there's anything odd about this. He's just conversing with the beast. I mean, obviously, it's a folk tale. I always like to point this out. It is not an anti-supernaturalistic bias that makes biblical critics label something like this a folk tale. Let's assume the critters do have intelligence like this. They are pretty intelligent. And they got words running through their minds, and they have memories. You know, I've always been a pretty good donkey to you, and you're treating me like this. Let's assume God God could cause him to speak. And remember that it's not like the donkey is said to be some sort of a ventriloquist dummy, that it's as if it's the word of God coming out of the mouth of the donkey, right? I mean, that would be disgusting enough, but it doesn't say that. The donkey speaks for herself. Oh, I haven't always been a good donkey. Well, yeah, it's obviously a folktale because of that, not because of the ostensible miracle. I mean, you know, that's another problem. If talking animals, is there any reason to believe such a story? Because there are none like that in anybody's experience today. So, yeah, it's pretty weird. And usually the Bible doesn't go quite this far into unmitigated folklore. Well, back to the book of Revelation for another listener question. Tony from Quincy, Mass., probably right down the street from my good friend Will Murray, the great pulp magazine scholar and terrific writer. Anyway, Tony says, the other day I was discussing Revelation with a Christian, and I expressed my hesitance toward teaching children about that book of the Bible. My concern is related to exposing children to potentially disturbing concepts like apocalyptic end times theology and things like the beast, etc. Granted, it's been a long time since I delved into that book, but I spent a good deal of time trying to understand it in my youth in a fundamentalist church and with no theological training, and I found many troubling things which at the time I thought I had to believe. I'm sure I also passively imbibed other people's theologies on these topics along the way. Anyway, she responded by saying, Revelation is a meaningful piece of work about worship and integrity in the face of persecution. Now, I don't remember enough to say that it doesn't contain passages about such things, but is that what Revelation is about? Yeah, I think it is, actually, Tony. I think she's right. I love the book of Revelation, and it certainly is very largely about people sticking by their guns, having the integrity not to knuckle under in times of persecution. I mean, it's easy to transfer that to imagined political scenarios where the government might give you a lot of trouble for either your religious or political beliefs, your sexual orientation, whatever, and you gotta be wise, but stick up for yourself. Like what does it say in the Gospels? I send you forth in the midst of like lambs in the midst of wolves. Be innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. Well, yeah, it is. It doesn't seem to me to involve jihadism, right? The holy war. You can find that in the Old Testament. I don't see that here. But it does envision martyrdom, not blowing yourself up to kill others, but being willing to go to your death for your principles. It's not really any different than somebody being willing to die for their country, I think. It's the same sort of a thing. Now, you and I, not being religious believers, might think it's sort of a shame that people would die for what we think is a fantasy, but that doesn't detract from their great courage and their integrity. I certainly salute that. And Revelation is largely about that. It's just that it's not only about that, and there is a lot of gore in it, right? The Armageddon, the blood rises as high as the bridles on the horses, and there's this huge battlefield thickly heaped with corpses, and the summons is made to all the carrion birds to come and feast on the rotting carcasses and stuff like that. And then there's the lake of burning sulfur and all this stuff. Yeah, there's some pretty rough stuff in there. Maybe that's not good for kids, but I have to go along with Bruno Bettelheim in his terrific book, The Uses of Enchantment. I don't really think one ought to shield kids from these classic dark fairy tales and so forth, and Revelation is much like that, I think. I'm not trying to insult it or anything, but those fairy tales are quite profound too, as Bettelheim shows. I think that they shouldn't just be given Care Bear nonsense and Barney the dinosaur. They need to be shown that there is a dark side, but in a way that is not like the reality they will face daily. They needn't be afraid that this is going to happen to them. It's kind of safe to entertain it in the form of fantasy. Therefore, we have a really big difference here if we're talking about catechizing kids to believe that the book of Revelation is factually true. That's another matter, right? But if we're just talking about familiarizing kids with this, I go with Bedelheim on the fairy tales, which are often kind of gruesome. Hansel and Gretel, for Pete's sake, right? So I think, it does have good lessons to teach, and it does have amazing imagery that, like science fiction, will stimulate the imagination. I do think it's very unfortunate when kids are taught the horrors of hell as reality, though. We don't have the right to try to stop them, as some people seem to think. To me, that is Stalinism. No matter what kind of crazy stuff parents are teaching their kids, it's really up to them. It's their job to teach and train their children the best way they know. And you can't just take them away. I mean, unless you've got, grossly abusive, rotten parents. But thinking of God-fearing, pious parents, I wish they wouldn't teach them some of the stuff they're teaching them, but it's their right. And it's worse to think you know better and barge in there, I think. Not that you're suggesting that, Tony. I don't get that impression at all. Well, that's about it for the Human Bible. Today, I'm glad you spent some time with us, and I hope you're duly edified and informed. I have a good amount of questions, but I can always use more. There's no reason I have to restrict myself to 2 on a show, so if you've got more questions, please send them in. And thanks again for being a fan of the Human Bible. Thanks for joining me on this episode of The Human Bible. To send us questions or comments on the show, which we really hope you do, you can email questions@thehumanbible.net or feedback@thehumanbible.net. We're also on Twitter @HumanBible, on Facebook @/TheHumanBible. And you can even leave a voicemail on our Human Bible hotline by calling 716-71-BIBLE. You can get all that information and more on our website, thehumanbible.net. Views expressed on the Human Bible aren't necessarily the views of the Center for Inquiry, nor its affiliated organizations. The Human Bible is produced by John Felix and features contributions from Debbie Goddard. I'm your host, Robert M. Price.